Samyukta was rinsing a coffee mug when she noticed his phone vibrating on the counter. The screen lit the dim kitchen with a pale blue notification glow. She did not intend to look, only to silence the sound. Her thumb brushed the glass, and the notification opened instead. A video thumbnail filled the screen, blurred but unmistakably intimate. For one suspended second, she hesitated between restraint and curiosity. Then the file began to play without sound. Their bedroom appeared, framed from a low angle near the foot of the bed. She recognized the lamp, the sheets, the folded blanket at the corner. Even before the face appeared, she already understood what this was. The woman on the screen was young, confident, and leaning into the camera. She wore one of Aaron's shirts, the fabric loose against bare skin. Samyukta felt the room tilt as recognition crashed into certainty. The woman smiled as if performing for someone who already adored her. Then she whispered it, light and playful, almost affectionate in tone. "Delete this before your wife sees." The words struck harder than the image itself. Sound rushed back into the room as Samyukta's breath returned. Her hands trembled, yet she did not drop the phone. She watched the clip again, forcing her mind to accept each detail. Her confident gaze felt calm, sure, and absolute. The kitchen seemed suddenly unfamiliar, as if the walls had shifted. Every memory of their marriage rearranged itself around that whisper, late nights, guarded smiles, the way he angled his phone away. Small moments she had dismissed now sharpened into meaning. She scrolled his messages with shaking hands but found nothing. The video had already been deleted from the chat history. Only the afterimage remained, branded behind her eyes. She felt no urge to scream or cry in that moment. What surfaced instead was a cold, steady focus, the kind that arrives when shock outruns emotion. Her reflection in the dark window looked older somehow. Not broken, not furious, only suddenly and completely awake. When Aaron stepped into the kitchen moments later, she turned calmly. He spoke about traffic and a late meeting without noticing her stare. She studied his face as if seeing a stranger perform a familiar role. There was no confrontation, no accusation, no shift in his routine. She nodded at the right moments and poured his coffee as usual. Inside, something detached and began assembling quiet questions. Where was he going so late? Why now? Why with her? That night he placed his phone beside the bed without hesitation. Samyukta lay awake listening to his breathing steady into sleep. By dawn she had made a decision without ever naming it aloud. She would not confront him yet, only follow him. By the morning after the video, nothing in the house visibly changed. Aaron left for work at the same hour. Samyukta prepared breakfast the same way. Their polite routines unfolded with the ease of long repetition. If anyone had watched them from the outside, they would have seen an ordinary married couple moving through an ordinary weekday. What could not be seen was how every shared movement now carried the weight of what she knew. Silence had always been part of their marriage, but this silence felt deliberate, shaped, and thick with omission. They had built their life together over 12 years, first as students, then as business partners, and finally as spouses who no longer needed to explain themselves. Their interior design firm occupied most of their time. Meetings ran late, deadlines overlapped, clients demanded constant availability. Somewhere along the way, professional coordination replaced conversation. Dinner often happened in front of separate screens. Updates came through messages instead of words. Intimacy thinned quietly, without argument or explosion. The changes in Aaron, however, had been gradual enough to disguise themselves as stress. He began carrying his phone everywhere, even into rooms where it had no purpose. Notifications buzzed at irregular hours. When Samyukta entered a room unexpectedly, he tilted the screen away on instinct rather than intention. He never snapped, never raised suspicion through anger. He simply became efficient with his privacy, and efficiency was something she had learned not to question. The late nights increased, schedules shifted without warning. He started naming clients she had never met, projects she was not directly overseeing. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern she did not yet want to acknowledge. When she occasionally asked for details, he provided just enough to satisfy the question without inviting discussion. Their conversations became functional transactions, clean, smooth, empty. It was during that period that the young consultant entered their professional orbit. Her resume arrived through a referral, neatly formatted and impressive. She introduced herself through email first, direct, articulate, precise. When she came in for a trial project, her competence was undeniable. She asked specific questions. She anticipated corrections before they were needed. Aaron took a visible interest in her efficiency, assigning her to more projects than initially required. Site visits increased. Design reviews extended into evening hours. Samyuktu noticed the shift not through jealousy, but through displacement. Decisions that once passed through both of them now moved between the two of them without her. Conversations changed tone. Deadlines became flexible only when that flexibility benefited her involvement. The firm still functioned smoothly, but the balance had tilted. Samyuktu could feel it without identifying its source. Still, she said nothing. There was no evidence, only atmosphere. Then came the video. With that discovery, every overlooked detail reorganized itself into clear intent. The secrecy made sense. The schedule changes aligned perfectly. The confidence in the girl's voice, the casual intimacy of that whisper, carried implications no explanation could dismantle. Yet even with the certainty burning beneath her calm exterior, Samyukti chose restraint. Confirmation mattered, not because she doubted what she saw, but because she needed to understand the full dimensions of the betrayal. Throughout the day, she observed Aaron quietly. His posture was relaxed. His voice even. He joked with vendors, discussed costs, made dinner plans without hesitation. The ease with which he performed normalcy unsettled her more than any defensive denial could have. It meant that deception had become natural. Night came without warning. The sky darkened outside their apartment windows as they reviewed invoices at the dining table. Papers lay between them. The soft glow of overhead light softened Aaron's expression into something almost familiar again. Then he said it, casually, almost as an afterthought. He mentioned that he had a late business meeting with a contractor near the airport and would be home much later than usual. Samyuktu looked up from the paperwork without speaking. An airport hotel, he added, and in that moment everything aligned. Samyuktu waited until Aaron's car disappeared at the far end of the street before moving. The apartment felt larger once he was gone, as if the silence had expanded into every room. She stood for several seconds in the entryway, listening to the faint echo of city traffic through the windows, steadying her breathing. Then she opened her laptop and searched for rooms near the airport without comparison, without hesitation. Her hands moved with precision that felt detached from emotion. She did not book under her married name. Instead, she typed the name she had not used in years, the one that belonged to a version of herself untouched by compromise. The confirmation email appeared almost instantly, one room, same floor, 2 hours before his late meeting. She closed the screen as if the reservation might vanish if she stared too long. By the time she shut the apartment door behind her, the choice no longer felt reactive. It felt manufactured, controlled. The hotel stood beside the freeway, a long concrete stretch of glass and neutral lighting designed to look identical from every angle. Inside, travelers moved with rolling suitcases and distant expressions, passing one another without memory or acknowledgement. Samyukta blended easily into the pattern. No one studied her at the front desk. No one asked why she arrived early or alone. The clerk slid her key card across the counter and recited routine instructions in a practiced monotone. Third floor, left turn from the elevator. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and warmed carpet. Identical doors lined both sides like numbered barriers to separate lives. Her room was directly opposite the one she had already memorized from the booking screen. She entered quietly and stopped just inside the door, listening to the borrowed silence. The room was unremarkable: beige walls, dim lamps, a single chair near the window overlooking the highway. She left her bag unopened on the floor. Time tightened. She checked the corridor twice under the guise of adjusting the door latch. Her movements were calm, calculated. No cameras stood at either end of the hall. No housekeeping carts passed. When the elevator finally chimed in the distance, the sound cut through her with sharp clarity. Instinct moved her to the peephole. Aaron stepped out first. A second later, the woman followed. She was younger than Samyukta had imagined. Her posture was relaxed, her smile untroubled, her suitcase moving with casual familiarity between them. Aaron leaned toward her as they spoke, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He lifted her bag without pause, without strain, as if the motion belonged to routine rather than secrecy. Their laughter drifted faintly down the hall, light and unguarded. They stopped at the door across from Samyukta. The latch failed to catch fully as they entered. A thin sliver of lamplight remained visible from the hallway. The door did not close all the way. Samyukta remained frozen at the peephole, aware only after several seconds that she had stopped breathing. The intimacy she witnessed from this distance felt heavier than the video ever had. In the quiet choreography between them, there was no confusion left to resolve. Every last doubt disappeared. Minutes passed, then more. The hallway remained empty. No footsteps returned. No voices crossed the door. The sliver of light endured. Samyukta backed slowly away from the peephole and stood in the center of her room, suddenly unsure where to place her body. Her hands trembled for the first time since she had arrived. Her pulse climbed into her throat, loud enough that she briefly feared it might be heard through the walls. She had come to observe, not to act, yet action arrived anyway, subtle and unavoidable. The thought unfolded with frightening clarity. She could not face both of them at once. Aaron would control the narrative. He would dilute the truth with explanations and professional instinct. If she wanted unfiltered answers, she would need the young woman alone. That single requirement reorganized everything. Samyukta opened her bag and removed the prepaid phone she used only for vendors who preferred cash and anonymity. No personal identifiers, no synced accounts. The screen glowed blank and obedient in her palm. She typed quickly, shaping the tone to mimic the technical urgency Aaron responded to without reflection. Client arrived early. Electrical layout issue. Needs immediate confirmation at Rivergate office. No greeting, no signature. She sent the message and waited. Seconds stretched thin. Then the door across the hall shifted. Low voices flickered briefly, indistinct. Footsteps followed. One set only. Through the peephole, she watched Aaron stride toward the elevator with urgency in his posture and trust in his expression. The doors closed without hesitation. The hallway fell silent again. Samyukta did not move. She only turned slowly toward the door across from her. Samyukta crossed the hallway with measured steps, the carpet swallowing the sound of her shoes. The thin line of light beneath the opposite door no longer trembled. Whoever waited inside was still. She raised her hand twice before finding the strength to knock once. The sound felt louder than it should have. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door shifted inward, slow and cautious. A shadow stretched across the threshold as the lock disengaged. Ira opened the door with suspicion already tightening her features. Confusion registered first, then recognition, then raw alarm. The air between them froze. Neither spoke immediately, as if language itself required negotiation. Samyukta caught the faint scent of perfume and the warmer trace of Aaron's cologne still lingering in the room behind her. Ira's hand tightened on the edge of the door, preparing to pull it closed. Her knuckles whitened as survival instinct surged upward. "You shouldn't be here," Ira said, the words tumbling out too fast. Samyukta answered with only one sentence, quiet and devastating, "I saw the video." The effect was immediate. Color drained from Ira's face, replaced by something feral and defensive. She lunged to shut the door. Samyukta reacted without thought, planting her palm against the wood, forcing it back open with surprising strength. The doorway became a narrow battlefield of breath and balance. Inches separated them. They collided awkwardly in the cramped entryway, shoulders striking wall and door in uneven rhythm. Ira grabbed Samyukta's wrist, twisting to drive her backward into the hall. Panic flavored every movement. Samyukta stumbled, her heel catching on the leg of a narrow side table positioned too close to the wall. The world tilted. Her free hand shot outward in blind reflex, searching for anything solid. Her fingers closed around cold ceramic without recognition. It was. Ira surged forward again, desperate to push Samyuk to back into the hallway before control was lost completely. Their arms tangled, neither fully advancing nor retreating. The vase, caught between motion and resistance, became part of the struggle without intention. Samyukta tried to pull free. Her muscles jerked in a single reflexive arc, driven by fear rather than aim. The impact came at the exact instant balance abandoned both women. There was no warning in her. The sound was dull and final, unlike anything Samyukta had imagined a violent moment would produce. Ira's body reacted before her expression did. Her grip slackened, her knees faltered. She struck the corner of the bed as she fell, momentum carrying her sideways until she collapsed onto the carpet near the lamp. The room seemed to inhale sharply and then hold its breath. Silence spread outward, thick and absolute, pressing into Samyukta's ears. Nothing moved. For a suspended second, Samyukta remained where she stood, the vase slipping from her fingers to roll once along the floor. She took a step toward Ira and said her name, softly at first, then louder. There was no answer. Ira's eyes stared past her without focus. A thin line of blood traced slowly into the carpet fibers. The air felt suddenly distant, as if the room had widened. Samyukta's breath came in uneven pulls. She backed away as if the floor itself had become unstable beneath her. The full shape of what had happened refused to settle into language. There was only the sight of a body where a person had been seconds earlier. Panic surged now, late and overwhelming. Her gaze darted to the door, to the hallway beyond, to the impossible normalcy waiting outside. Some instinct whispered that staying meant everything would end. She turned without thinking. Samyukta crossed the hall in a blur and fumbled with her own door, hands slick with sweat. Inside her room, the lights still glowed where she had left them. The untouched bag waited near the bed. She grabbed it without checking what went inside and moved toward the service stairwell she had noted earlier. Each step echoed too loudly in her ears. The world narrowed to movement, to sound, to escape alone. Behind her, silence. When she reached the bottom of the stairwell, the night air struck her face with sudden force. She did not look back. She did not count the minutes. Somewhere above her, a door remained closed, a body unmoving on the carpet beside a shattered moment. Samyukta stepped into the dark parking lot and kept walking. In the room above, time stood still around what had just ended. None of them knew who would find her. The hallway was quiet when Aaron returned, the elevator releasing him onto the third floor with a muted chime. He walked toward the room with his phone pressed to his ear, murmuring an apology to a client about the dropped meeting. The door opened to darkness and stale perfume. He called Ira's name once, distracted, then again with irritation. When his eyes adjusted, he saw her on the carpet beside the bed, one arm twisted unnaturally, the lamp still on. The silence landed heavy and wrong. For a second his mind refused the meaning of what his body already understood. He knelt beside her in a rush that scattered his composure, touching her shoulder, then her wrist, searching for warmth or response. Her skin was cooling beneath his fingers. Panic surged without direction. He staggered backward, knocking into the edge of the bed, and fumbled for his phone. The words to the operator came out tangled and broken, fragments of location and fear and names. He said she had fallen. He said she was not moving. He said he did not know what had happened. His voice rose and cracked as reality pushed through denial in uneven, gasping waves finally. First responders arrived within minutes, their efficiency cutting through the chaos he had created. Paramedics moved first, confirming what the stillness had already declared. Police followed, sealing the hallway with brisk authority and asking guests to remain inside their rooms. Doors clicked shut up and down the corridor. Curious faces vanished. The third floor became a contained world of flashing lights, radio static, and controlled urgency. In the middle of it all, Aaron stood barefoot beside the bed, shaking and silent. No one yet knew how many lives had already been pulled into the gravity of that room that night. Detectives began their methodical sweep as the paramedics withdrew. The body remained on the carpet, partially covered, the outline still unmistakable. The vase lay nearby on its side, a fracture running along its rim, flecks of blood dried against the ceramic glaze. The room itself showed signs of struggle only in suggestion, a shifted table, a scuffed wall, a displaced lamp. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing that immediately pointed outward. The absence of violence felt louder than broken furniture, as if the room itself was withholding the missing seconds. Officers exchanged brief looks that carried emerging unease. The absence of hallway cameras reshaped the investigation instantly. Hotel management confirmed the blind spot with practiced discomfort. The corridor had no visual record of who entered or exited during the critical window. Without footage, officers shifted to human doors, knocking quietly but persistently, asking routine questions through cracked openings. Most guests recalled nothing beyond distant voices and a slammed door earlier in the evening. One room, however, remained unanswered despite repeated attempts. It was directly across from the crime scene, the position with the clearest view of the corridor. The lack of response shifted mild curiosity into procedural concern. With hotel authorization, officers used a master key to enter the silent room. The interior told a restrained story of recent presence: an unmade bed, a damp towel in the bathroom, a half-finished glass of water on the table. There was no luggage, no clothing laid out, no signs of an overnight stay. The absence felt deliberate rather than accidental. Whatever occupant had been there, she had departed quickly and without announcement. The name on the registry did not match the man waiting across the hall in shock. Detectives copied it silently before returning their attention to the body again. Back in the main room, the forensic team focused on the vase as their primary point of contact. It was lifted with careful precision and bagged as evidence. Under the rim, just beneath the fracture, a partial fingerprint emerged through chemical dusting. The print was incomplete yet clean enough to preserve. The lead technician marked it silently, already aware of its potential weight. Blood transfer patterns along the carpet were mapped in careful lines. Each observation tightened the developing narrative without yet naming its direction or its consequence. The room was orderly, but the air felt crowded with implication now. Late into the night, sources returned quietly from the lab. The partial print, incomplete but distinct, had been run through preliminary comparison against available databases. It produced a tentative alignment that drew sudden attention from the investigators. The name associated with the match belonged to the woman registered in the room across the hall, the wife. The file was closed slowly, as if handled with caution rather than relief. The room grew still with the weight of certainty. Across the hall, the abandoned room waited, silent and empty, already turning from shelter into evidence. The next revelation was unavoidable now. By morning, the third-floor room had emptied of noise, but not of questions. Yellow tape framed the door like a warning sign to memory itself. Detectives Hale and Morrison reviewed the overnight reports in silence, the fingerprint match still unofficial but heavy between them. The wife across the hall had vanished before police arrived. That absence now mattered as much as the body itself. A timeline was the only thing left that could still speak. It was time to let the date talk now. The hotel's digital key records became the spine of the reconstruction. Aaron's access log showed multiple late-night entries over the last 3 weeks, always after midnight, always brief. Ira's key opened only once that night. The missing room across the hall showed a single entry under a different name, paid in cash. More telling was the final movement. Aaron's key exited the floor at 9:14 p.m., minutes before the fatal window investigators now circled in red. It narrowed their search to a brutal sliver of. Digital forensics peeled back the next layer with colder precision. Aaron's phone revealed deleted call logs to an unregistered prepaid number, wiped hours before police arrived. Cloud recovery pulled fragments of messages, incomplete but intimate, promises broken mid, sentence by haste. Ira's own phone showed frantic drafts she never sent. The burner number activated only 2 weeks earlier, using towers near the hotel and the couple's business district, never near the wife's home again afterwards. Its silence after the crime felt deliberate, almost ceremonial in tone. The financial trail proved harder to erase than emotion. Hidden charges emerged through layered accounts, boutique hotel stays, airline upgrades, luxury gifts billed as consulting expenses. Small transfers moved from Aaron's company into a shadow account that fed Ira's lifestyle. The pattern was careful but consistent, a secret economy just beneath their public success. Investigators traced the last payment to the very day of the killing, marked simply as emergency travel support. It read like planning disguised as generosity in neat digital columns of intent. The message that pulled Aaron from the room became the pivot of everything. He swore it was a routine client emergency, but the network left its own fingerprints behind. Triangulation placed the sender within 200 feet of the hotel at the moment it was sent. Payment records tied the burner activation to a prepaid kiosk near Samyukta's office. Nothing proved authorship outright, but the convergence bent the investigation decisively toward one name. From that point, every thread seemed to return to her alone again. Aaron's second interview unfolded under the quiet weight of accumulated facts. Without accusing him, detectives let the evidence speak in measured sequence. His posture collapsed inch by inch. He denied planning, denied knowledge of the burner, denied the payments meant anything beyond indulgence. Yet his story shifted with each new document placed on the table. The timeline tightened until contradictions overlapped like pressure points. By the end, even he no longer sounded certain of his own innocence. Suspicion settled over him like a second skin. With digital, financial, and location data aligned, the legal machinery turned with formal inevitability. Prosecutors reviewed the mosaic and weighed the burden of probable cause. The wife's unexplained flight from the hotel, the print on the vase, the prepaid phone, the message, the money, all pointed in the same direction. By evening, a judge authorized what investigators had already decided they needed. The warrant was printed, signed, and timed, stamped with quiet gravity. No sirens yet, only the slow gathering of consequence at the edge of night. Across town, Samyukta moved through her house with mechanical calm, every sound amplified by the waiting. She had scrubbed her hands raw, replayed the hallway in fractured loops, and rehearsed futures that never settled. The television murmured without meaning. Her phone lay face down, untouched since dawn. She did not know the investigation had already reached inward through wires and records toward her door. She only felt the approaching weight of something unnamed pressing closer. Each minute slowed, stretching the silence into punishment that felt infinite. Unmarked cars rolled out in staggered sequence, radio chatter clipped and minimal. Officers reviewed the warrant one last time under dashboard light, names and charges glowing dimly in the paper's fibers. No one speculated aloud about resistance or guilt. Experience taught them that the moments before an arrest were the most unstable. Somewhere ahead, a house waited in ordinary stillness, unaware that it had already been formally entered by law through ink and signature alone. The final approach always felt quieter than expected by design. Samyukta was standing at the kitchen sink when headlights washed across the front wall. Tires whispered against the curb. A knock followed, firm and official, cutting through the house like a blade. She froze, hands submerged in cold water, breath caught between inhale and fear. On the porch, silhouettes shifted into position. A voice spoke her name through the door, steady and unmistakably controlled. In that moment, the distance between evidence and consequence finally collapsed. Outside, badges caught the light as the warrant rose upward. Samyukta sat beneath the harsh fluorescent panel, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. The door closed with a muted thud that sounded final. Detective Hale introduced no small talk, only time and consequence. A recorder clicked alive on the metal table. She stared at its red eye as if it were watching her breathe. Outside the room, rain traced crooked lines down the glass, blurring the hallway into motion she could not reach anymore. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to accuse. Hale asked where she had been the previous night. Her answer came steady, rehearsed by panic and repetition. She said she returned home early and slept badly. Morrison slid a photo across the table without comment. The hotel hallway froze between them in still color. Samyukta's breath hitched once before she forced it smooth again. She shook her head quietly. "I was never there," she said, and the lie sounded practiced. The recorder swallowed every syllable with patient, merciless certainty. Hale watched her without blinking. They began slowly, as hunters do, placing facts like stones across a river she had hoped no one would cross. Her phone had pinged near the hotel. The burner activation traced back to a kiosk by her office. Keycard logs placed her on the exact floor at the exact hour. With each detail, her denial lost a layer of certainty. Still she clung to it, nodding, murmuring, refusing to collapse before proof finished surrounding her. The room felt smaller as silence withdrew its thin protection. The vase photograph came next, rotated under the light so the fracture caught attention. Hale spoke gently now, not as an adversary but as a guide toward inevitability. The partial fingerprint overlay appeared on the monitor. The alignment was not perfect, but it did not need to be. Samyukta stared at the ridges as if they belonged to someone else's hand. Her lips trembled, still sealed around denial she could no longer secure. Tears gathered without falling, clinging to the edge of surrender. Breathing stuttered. The message that summoned her husband away appeared like a quiet blade on the screen. Time stamp, location, device origin, all stacked into one narrow corridor of responsibility. Samyukta's shoulders sagged as though the room had leaned against her. She whispered that she only meant to scare him, only meant to see the woman's face without him beside her. Her confession hovered at the edge of admission, afraid of the fall that followed clarity. Silence absorbed the statement like a wound taking in air slowly. When she finally spoke again, the mask cracked completely. Words rushed out unstructured, raw with shame and recoil. She described the door opening, the shock of recognition, the way fear and rage tangled inside her chest until they felt identical. She told them how the struggle was clumsy, accidental, how she reached without intention and movement answered before thought could intervene. She insisted she never meant to strike, only to push away what had poisoned her life. The accident became her only remaining shelter now. The detectives let her speak until the storm burned down to quiet embers. Morrison offered a tissue without comment. Samyukta pressed it to her eyes, smearing the careful composure she had worn for years. Between broken breaths, she spoke of the video, of the whisper that unmade her reality in seconds. She said the betrayal felt surgical, precise, leaving no place untouched by humiliation. The crime, she claimed, was born the moment truth cut first. Even now, she seemed to flinch from the memory alone. Hale did not challenge the word accident, but he did not accept it either. He asked about distance, about force, about the way the body fell. Each question peeled intent from panic by degrees. Samyukta answered through shaking breaths, uncertain where memory ended and invention began. The law, Hale reminded her gently, would decide whether fear excused outcome. In the pause that followed, she seemed to understand for the first time that truth did not guarantee mercy. It only rearranged the shape of coming punishment. Outside the room, prosecutors reviewed the notes in low voices, weighing elements the way architects weigh stress on hidden beams. Evidence supported intent through preparation, yet the struggle blurred the final motion into ambiguity. Charges were a matter of framing as much as fact. Murder required a narrative of purpose. Manslaughter demanded belief in the accident she described. The line between them was thin as the vase fracture that still glimmered on the crime scene photograph. No decision yet, only the weight of choosing wrong. When the recorder finally clicked off, the room felt suddenly unguarded. Samyukta was led away down a corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. She did not look back. Hale remained seated for a moment, staring at the darkened screen where her story had been captured line by line. Somewhere above the building, night settled into a patient witness. By morning, he knew the state would choose a name for her crime. Whether it would be murder or something lesser waited ahead still. The courtroom felt smaller than it had during voir dire, as if the walls had inched inward overnight. Samyukta sat between her attorneys in a pale blouse that made her look almost spectral under the lights. Across the aisle, the state arranged its binders like weapons laid neatly on a table. Aaron sat in the first row behind the prosecution, face drawn, hands folded as though in prayer. When the judge entered, the murmur died instantly. The clerk read the case name aloud, and with it, the private tragedy hardened into a public charge that could not be taken back. Opening statements carved the night into opposing shapes. The prosecutor spoke first, voice even methodical, describing planning disguised as heartbreak. She outlined the burner phone, the hotel registry under an alias, the message that pulled Aaron from the room like a string. Each fact was placed with surgical calm. The defense followed with a tremor in its tone, painting grief and humiliation as invisible accomplices. They spoke of shock, of a woman who walked into a truth she was never meant to witness. Intent, they insisted, was what the state could never truly prove. The medical examiner testified with restrained neutrality, describing the injury in terms stripped of drama. The blow had landed at the base of the skull, just behind the ear, where bone thinned and vulnerability narrowed the margin between harm and death. The vase, heavy and rigid, transferred force efficiently through a single uncontrolled motion. Death, the examiner explained, would not have been instant, but rapid enough to leave little chance for aid. Jurors shifted as diagrams appeared, translating a moment of chaos into lines and angles that felt merciless in their clarity. The digital analyst followed with the cold authority of timestamps and towers. Screens lit with call graphs, deleted messages resurrected in pale text, and location pins clustering like quiet accusations around the hotel. The burner phone activation traced back to the kiosk near Samyukta's office, the payment logged to an unremarkable debit card tied to no emotion at all. Financial overlays showed the steady current of money between Aaron and Ira, disguised as business but shaped like intimacy. Technology, the analyst concluded, does not forget what people beg it to lose. Hotel staff took the stand one by one, reluctant narrators of an unremarkable night that had grown monstrous in hindsight. The clerk confirmed the alias, the cash payment, the blind corridor with no camera reach. A housekeeper described the displaced lamp and the broken vase with a voice that quivered despite practice. Each small logistical truth pressed the story tighter around Samyukta. Even absence testified against her now, the empty room across the hall transforming from coincidence into strategy under the patient construction of the prosecution's questions. The defense shifted the lens from evidence to emotion, calling their own psychologist to speak of acute shock and reactive violence. They traced the fracture of Samyukta's composure back to the video, the whispered warning that detonated her certainty of marriage. Betrayal, the witness explained, can collapse cognition in seconds, compressing judgment into impulse. They argued that her confrontation was not born from calculation, but from unfiltered devastation. In this version of events, the vase became not a weapon, but a reflex shaped by terror and disbelief. Aaron's testimony arrived like a wound reopened in public. He described the affair in halting admissions, shame cutting through each sentence. He spoke of Ira as both mistake and refuge, of the lies that multiplied so easily once the first had survived. When asked about the message that lured him from the room, his voice broke. He looked once toward Samyukta without recognition, as though she were already reduced to the role the trial demanded. The courtroom absorbed their shared history with a quiet that felt almost predatory. Closing arguments arrived like opposing storms. The prosecution assembled the evidence into a single ruthless narrative, deliberate preparation, intentional confrontation, and a blow that followed choice rather than chance. They reminded the jury of the burner phone purchased in advance, the message crafted to isolate Ira, the alias meant to shield identity. The defense answered with fracture and feeling, with a woman who walked into a betrayal so complete it erased calculation. They asked the jury to see not a strategist, but a sudden widowed soul of marriage, undone in one unbearable hour. The judge's instructions settled over the room with heavy finality, outlining degrees of intent and the gravity of choice that separated them. Jurors listened without expression, each already carrying a private version of the truth into the language of law. When they stood to leave, the scrape of chairs sounded unnaturally loud. Samyukta did not move, her hands resting flat on the table as if holding herself in place. Aaron closed his eyes. The bailiff guided the jury through the side door, one by one, until the box stood empty. For the first time since the night at the hotel, no one spoke for several long seconds. The courtroom waited, suspended between versions of her future that no one could yet name. Outside, reporters gathered like weather at the edge of the building, microphones poised for a verdict that did not yet exist, while inside, the silence stretched thin and unbearable until even breathing felt like testimony. Time itself seemed to hesitate in the doorway. The jury returned just after noon, their footsteps muffled like an approaching storm. Samyukta stood when the bailiff commanded, knees trembling beneath borrowed fabric. Aaron remained seated, eyes fixed on the edge of the defense table. The foreperson's hands shook as the single page was unfolded. No one breathed. Outside, the crowd pressed closer to the doors. Inside, the courtroom held its breath, suspended between versions of truth that had torn every life open. Even the air felt afraid to move before what would follow. The verdict came in a voice strangely gentle for its weight. guilty of manslaughter, not murder. A murmur rippled through the gallery, part relief, part devastation, neither side fully satisfied. Samyukta's shoulders collapsed inward as if struck by an invisible blow. Aaron closed his eyes, not in gratitude, but exhaustion. The law had chosen a word for what happened, and with it, a future that none of them could have imagined 48 hours earlier. The sentence would decide how long that word would follow her. Sentencing came swiftly, stripped of ceremony. The judge spoke of accountability, of lives fractured outward from one uncontrolled moment, 8 years with the possibility of parole after half. The numbers echoed without meaning at first, like a language she had not yet learned. Samyukta nodded as if agreement still mattered. When the cuffs closed around her wrists, the sound snapped through the room like glass. She did not look at Aaron as she was led away. Her reflection vanished in the door's narrow, metallic seam. Aaron walked out later through a different corridor, legally free and socially ruined. Sponsors withdrew by evening, clients canceled by morning. The company he had built on quiet charm and borrowed trust began to collapse under the sudden weight of public record. Friends stopped calling. Family spoke in cautious fragments. He would never be charged with a crime, yet everything that had once defined him was now evidence in another court, one that did not require a verdict. Their silence punished him more than prison. The video resurfaced during appeals as immutable as bone. The grainy clip became a permanent artifact of betrayal, replayed in studios, dissected in forums, stripped of privacy and mercy alike. The whisper that once lived only between two conspirators now traveled endlessly through strangers' screens. Delete this before your wife sees. It was too late for deletion, too late for erasure. The file would outlive all three of them in quieter, crueler ways. Time would not blur it. Repetition would only sharpen its edge. Now, in prison, Samyukta learned the exact architecture of hours. Noise without voice, touch without comfort, routine without meaning. At night, she replayed the door opening in endless rewinds, searching the moment where motion might have chosen another path. Some nights she believed it had been fate, others that it had been her. Guilt shifted its shape daily, sometimes a weight, sometimes a hollow. Either way, it never left. It waited in lines, in silence, in dreams, in the small mercy of forgetting that never arrived. The hotel room was renovated within months, the carpet replaced, the walls repainted, the lamp discarded. Guests slept where Ira had fallen without ever knowing her name. Only a faint discoloration beneath fresh fibers resisted full erasure, a subtle shadow the cleaners never quite conquered. Places remember differently than people do. They keep what matters to absence, not to story. The room continued to be rented, lived in, forgotten again and again. Time passed through it daily, carrying strangers who never sensed what it held. Reporters moved on, as they always do, toward fresher outrage. Headlines shortened into footnotes, then into nothing at all. Only algorithms remembered perfectly, offering the case back to anyone who searched long enough. Aaron saw it sometimes in reflections of screens in airports and cafes, his own past surfacing without warning. Samyukta heard it only through letters that never named the night directly, only its consequence in measured lines of ink. Both lived inside different versions of the same echo, neither able to fully escape. 48 hours had been enough to shatter a marriage, a life, and a lie built patiently over years. The secret that had once demanded deletion now demanded witness. It had crossed from whisper to record, from panic to prosecution. The law gave it a shape, but memory gave it teeth. Every character carried away a different punishment, unevenly distributed, imperfectly deserved, yet bound forever to the same brief corridor where everything tipped sideways. After that, there was no before left anywhere of them could return. Some secrets burn fast and vanish. Others smolder into history. This one became a file, a sentence, a silence that followed 3 lives in divergent directions. Ira remained in photographs and police exhibits. Aaron remained in memory and consequence. Samukter remained in years measured by visiting days and locked doors. What began as a warning meant to be erased became the map of their ruin, permanent ink on the record of all they destroyed. Some secrets don't stay buried, they surface as crimes that endure.